There's a foal floating in formaldehyde, white, small, unblinking, a steel horn drilled into its skull. This is Damien Hirst's unicorn, a creature that's outlived its own mythology, suspended in the space where meaning and money meet. But before we reach him, we have to go back in time, to remember where the unicorn came from, what it once meant, and what it says about us now. Because the unicorn is a mirror. Every age imagines it slightly differently. And what we see it in reveals what we most desire, or what that era most desires. Hello everyone, and this is the Art Theory, Culture and History podcast called Josephine. I need to come up with a quicker kind of tagline. If you have any ideas for that, please comment it below. That would be really helpful. These are basically going to be essays, as I've mentioned previously, about art history, about art theory, and today I am going to look at the myth that is the unicorn, and I'm really excited for this one, so let's get into it. So let's start with the origins of the unicorn. Long before it became a Christian symbol, the unicorn existed in these fragments. This icon, the unicorn, was scattered in various carvings in ancient texts, appearing in slightly different forms in terms of their body, and also in slightly different descriptions. In the Indus Valley, seals from around 2000 BCE, we see an elegant one-horned beast, part bull, part horse, facing a sacred tree. And historians, in fact, still debate what it actually was, what it meant. Perhaps a divine messenger, or perhaps a symbol of kingship. And then centuries later, Greek historians like Cetus of Cnidus described a similar creature in his writings on India. A white horse with a horn coloured in red, black and white. And he believed its horn could cure human sickness. It could also purify poisoned water. But for him, this wasn't a myth. The unicorn wasn't a myth. It was a form of zoology. And in Persia too, there was a known beast with a horn that was associated with strength and with purity. In China, there was the qilin, a creature of grace, justice, and cosmic harmony. And the qilin was said to only appear under the ruling of a just ruler, so someone who was, fair. And it would walk so gently that it would never even crush an insect. However, the Western unicorn became to represent something that was exotic and something that people wanted to capture, whereas the Asian unicorn represented more peace and restraint. So even from the very beginnings of its origin, there's different pathways being formed for what the creature is and what it represents. One that made the unicorn the prize of the hunt, a symbol of unattainable desire, and one that made it the measure of virtue, a sign of good governance and moral order. The West and the East each imagined the same creature, but with different kind of morals around it and story behind it. In one, the unicorn must be captured to be understood. It must be kind of somewhat owned, and in the other, it must be left untouched. Then, when Christianity started to evolve with the myth of the unicorn, it transformed its meaning again completely. And the unicorn in some ways became Christ itself. The divine was made into flesh, hunted, killed, and resurrected. In the Physiologus, a bestiary compiled in late antiquity, the unicorn could only be captured by a virgin maiden. The creature would rest its head in her lap and fall asleep, allowing the hunters to seize it. And for the early church, this was a perfect allegory. Perhaps the Virgin is Mary, the unicorn is Christ, and the capture is the incarnation. But allegories, once they are captured by art, never remain so pure. And by the 15th century, unicorns appeared everywhere in tapestries and paintings all across Europe. Symbols of purity, but also of longing, of desire. In the unicorn tapestries of the Met cloister, woven around 1500, we see the contradiction made visible. In one panel, we see the unicorn laying on the ground, pierced by lances. Its blood runs down along its flank, the stark contrast of its red blood against its white body. And in the next, it reappears alive, chained within a circular garden. It appears chained but unharmed. And art historians, as I've said before, are still in debate over what this really means. Is the unicorn Christ resurrected in paradise? Or is it the tamed lover domesticated by the gaze of purity? Either way, the story is somewhat the same. The wild, the wondrous, always seems to end up chained or desired. And the unicorn is one of the oldest metaphors for desire. To pursue it, to want what you cannot have, to catch it, to kill it, to consume it. And this paradox sits at the very heart of Western art. Desire produces beauty, but it also produces destruction. And by the Renaissance, the unicorn was now both holy and erotic, a figure of fantasy which varies from its very origins, where it was viewed more as a real creature. And in Leonardo's sketchings, it seems beautiful, it's delicate, but it's restless. And in Durer's drawings, the way it's depicted is more symbolic of some kind of inner turmoil, as it looks very angry and powerful. And by the Enlightenment, belief in its literal existence completely faded, but its symbolic power remained. And to some extent, the unicorn has become somewhat kitsch before the idea of kitsch even fully existed as a term. An emblem of innocence and nostalgia, repurposed endlessly for marketing campaigns, royal emblems, and apothecary labels. And it really survived every century by shape-shifting, by changing shape, by being what the people needed or wanted it to be. And by the 19th century, the unicorn was completely disenchanted. Naturalists exposed these fake kind of unicorn horns, which they didn't believe to be fake at the time, as actual narwhal tusks. And if you don't know what a narwhal is, it's a type of whale with one long kind of horn on its snout. And then myth turned to curiosity, and curiosity turned to that wonderful thing we know as commodity. But even as it died in natural history, it really began to thrive in fantasy. From tapestries to children's books, the unicorn becomes a symbol of innocence, and it's really entered both pop culture as well as a kind of silly and nostalgic and childlike symbol. From medieval bestiaries to Lisa Frank's stickers, which they are like these very bright, if you're just listening to this, they're these very bright kind of cartoonish like stickers. They feel very nostalgic. The unicorn has become the ultimate aesthetic survivor. And that's exactly what made it so vulnerable to the art world. Because the moment that irony meets innocence, artists like Damien Hirst come along and work with that idea. And in 2008, Damien Hirst revealed his work called The Dream. And it's very similar to his other work called, what is it? I think it's called The Flock. Let me actually just look that up. Oh yeah, so it's called Away from the Flock, which, if you didn't know, is very similar, but it's lambs. And what the dream is that is similar to lambs is basically an animal put inside a glass box covered in formaldehyde to restore the to maintain the dead body so that it does not rot. But obviously, in order to make this kind of fake unicorn, this is actually a dead foal or dead horse put inside a formaldehyde-filled box with like a fake horn attached to its head. And I would say at very first glance, it just looks like an incredibly tasteless, cruel joke. Not only because it's a mythical creature that is now dead, held stilted in time behind glass, but also because obviously it is actually a real animal that has been killed for the purpose of art. And even more so, I think it's a parody that's very revealing. I believe that Hirst has built his whole career on spectacle. And if I'm honest, I'm not really the biggest fan of Hirst. I'm sure me saying this isn't going to cause any controversy. His work is very garish. His work is very, well, dead animals are involved. So to me, that's not great. But his work is built on this tension between fascination and disgust, from these dead sharks to these dead sheep to encrusted skulls with diamonds. And his work turns death into almost like a design, a collectible thing, and the sacred into currency. And I have heard critics say that a lot of his work is shock for the sake of shock value. But I think the real shock here is the fact that it has been so accepted by the art world, how perfectly it fits into the logic that it, supposedly claims to critique. And I think it was John Berger, who is an art critic, who warned about this kind of visionary art, the myth of the what's it called, like the genius artist. And I think that Hirst slightly falls into this, like anything he touches becomes something that collectors want to buy into, even if there isn't much to it other than spectacle. He kind of writes that the idea of the visionary artist was a romantic fiction, one that justified art's complicity with power by pretending almost that it transcends it. And I really think that Hirst here is that myth weaponized. He plays that rebel but performs for collectors. He mimics critique, but he really, to me, I think, embodies it. He builds this illusion of danger in spaces built to actually protect capital. If unicorns were once the symbol of what couldn't be owned, Hirst's unicorn shows that anything can be owned nowadays. Nothing is beyond ownership, not even transcendence. And Berger goes on to describe how oil paintings have come to represent almost a form of property. They've become this kind of display. In the same way, Hirst's vitrines that the animals are captured in displays the property of the ultra-wealthy. The power to purchase death itself, to buy irony, to buy this corpse of wonder. And he has a line, he has a few lines. He has a section in one of his books that goes, publicity images often use sculpture or paintings to lend allure or authority by their own message. Framed oil paintings often hang in shop windows as part of their display. Any work of art quoted by publicity serves two purposes. Art is a sign of affluence. It belongs to the good life. It is part of the furnishing which the world gives the rich and the beautiful. But a work of art also suggests a cultural authority, a form of dignity, even of wisdom, which is superior to any vulgar material interest. An oil painting belongs to the cultural heritage. It is a reminder of what it means to be a cultivated European. And by the way, I'm completely aware of like some of the paintings I have behind me, but I did actually paint these myself. But I do find the art world and the buying and selling and kind of cultural vantage point you have, and like how it makes you come across as more wise or cultured or thoughtful as a person, as opposed to someone who has quote unquote more vapid interests. And it's really worth remembering that the dream, as I've mentioned, has a real animal inside. It once breathed, it once had a heartbeat. And Hirst insists that none of the animals were killed for the art. But the line between found and used is very thin, and I don't fully understand how, in some ways, just using the death of another creature is acceptable. And maybe that's just like my slight opinion coming out here, but I don't know, there's something that doesn't sit right. His work aestheticizes the remains of life. There is no grief allowed to happen. It's just this glass box where you can contain something and own it. There is no natural decomposition that can happen, just spectacle. And then I found this article by The New Yorker about taxidermy, and I found a passage that I thought would be interesting to, read to you guys. So the article was called "Taxidermy is a Metaphor of Our Time." And we preserve the things we destroy. A lot of taxidermy happens after hunting or shooting animals, and then we call it beauty. And it's only beauty when it's captured, when it's contained, when it's owned. Why can't we just enjoy the beauty of the world as it is? Why must we interfere and own it? And they write on Damien Hirst, the work of the artist Damien Hirst captures taxidermy's hard-to-place, melodramatic eeriness. Away from the Flock, as I mentioned before, is very similar to the unicorn, but it's just with lambs. From 1994, shows a lamb immersed in a tank of formaldehyde solution, its cuddly body somehow transformed by the pulsing, otherworldly blue of the chemical. In interviews, Hirst spoke of his work's tragic beauty, the way it distilled that failure of trying so hard to do something that you destroy the thing that you're trying to preserve. And that is what makes Hirst's unicorn so haunting. Not its shock value, but its emptiness. It's what happens when meaning itself becomes just embalmed. The unicorn used to represent what we could never possess. Now it represents what we've already lost, and that is wonder, the sacred, mystery. Hirst's work doesn't illuminate death, it monetizes it. It doesn't critique capitalism, it performs it with exquisite polish. He shows us the corpse of belief and calls it art. And I know I'm sounding so dramatic here, but I feel quite passionately about this piece of work. And as I researched more into the unicorn and its history, I just found the work even more devastating. But somehow, beneath all the irony and the glass, something of the creature still remains. The image of something untouchable, impossible, and innocent. And that's what the unicorn has always been. Not a creature, but a longing, a desire. And maybe the longing survives, even when this dream doesn't. And I also just want to mention that the use of the word unicorn has been used in venture capital and business too, to represent something that is, special or one of a kind. And the term was coined, the unicorn, by venture capitalist Alan Lee, who used it to describe companies like Airbnb, Uber, and SpaceX. Firms that seem to exist between finance and fantasy. And it's fitting that the unicorn, once a symbol of purity, has become the mascot of speculative capitalism. And in this way, startups and contemporary art both follow this same mythology under the umbrella of capitalism. They both transform imagination into currency in the way that they're currently run. So the unicorn has died 1,000 times and been rebirthed, reborn as something new each time to mold and reflect something that's happening in the current culture in society. For ours, it looks like Damien Hirst's The Dream or a startup company, a myth dissected, a longing commodified. This is where wonder becomes something that apparently you can own and buy and not just experience, which is not wonder at all. So the unicorn is just such a fascinating symbol. I hope that I've done it justice here. And if you have any more comments to talk about the history of unicorns, I know I didn't fully go into everything here because it has a very long history, then please feel free to comment that below and let me know your thoughts. And I will see you all again next time.